Hey good people, and welcome back to the channel. It's a wonderful Wednesday, and I know all of you are here for the new Married at First Sight review. So I'm going to deliver on that because episode 6 was definitely a doozy. And for the purposes of this review, I'm going to make every effort to give a fair and balanced perspective on what I saw during tonight's episode. Without any further delay, let's jump right in. First, let's talk about Mark and Lindsay. When I first saw Lindsay and Mark for the episode, I initially thought that Mark was going to be in protective custody, because it seemed like he did Lindsay a little dirty and she wasn't having any of it during last week's episode. But to my surprise, Lindsay and Mark woke up next to each other the following morning. It turns out that Mark and Lindsay had a conversation about their fallout, and they came to an understanding about what they wanted from the process. But one thing worth noting during these early scenes is the breakfast that was delivered to their room. They have a nice portion of bacon, pancakes, and toast to eat, which made me pretty proud to see, because up until this point, the cast members were eating fruits and pastries for breakfast. But as they eat breakfast, they talk about the topics of religion and having kids, which was nice to see because Lindsay seemed extremely grounded and likable during her exchange with Mark, sort of like how she was when she was talking to Mark's friends after the wedding. Later on in the episode, we learn that Mark is getting a call from his landlord, and he is facing eviction from his home. And what surprised me during this whole process was that Lindsay took it upon herself to offer Mark a place to stay at her house, which really caused Mark to see Lindsay in a different light. I can also say that this side of Lindsay is what I want to see more of. She's very likable, supportive, easy to talk to, and funny when she's not doing the extra stuff. Now let's move on to Katina and Elijah. They start the episode off heading outside to go horseback riding, and it's pretty clear that Katina really doesn't want to ride horses, but she's likely doing it to spend some quality time with Elijah. So as they're riding their horses, we see Katina visibly nervous about the experience, and Elijah is back in the drill sergeant mode, trying to push her through her fear. And while I understand Elijah may have good intentions, he was wrong for taking the hard approach with Katina, especially while dealing with dangerous animals like a horse. People who have gone horseback riding in the past have gotten seriously injured in certain situations, and I don't think Elijah took that into consideration when trying to push Katina. But after they go horseback riding, Katina and Elijah talk about the situation, and I think Katina would have been more receptive if Elijah had taken a softer approach with her and been the protector and motivator that she needed in the moment. Sadly, seeing Elijah like this reminds me of how he was during the episodes prior to the wedding. And if that side of him continues to pop up, I fear the worst for their marriage. Now on to Steve and Noi. They begin their journey this episode by going on a nature hike, which I'm pretty sure was Steve's idea, because Noi made it pretty clear last episode that she's not much of an outdoors person. But during this part of the episode, it was good to see Steve getting Noi outside of her comfort zone. And the approach that Steve uses to accomplish this was what Katina needed when horseback riding with Elijah. Steve was patient, understanding, and he wanted to assure Noi that he would have taken care of her. So they get into the river water, and Steve is trying to teach Noi how to float, and just as Noi is about to float on her own, a fish bites Steve, and it was a much needed tension breaker for the moment. Steve and Noi then share a good laugh about it, and it looks like they appreciated the remainder of their experience in the forest. Now let's talk about this whole Alyssa and Chris situation. Before we even see Chris and Alyssa, we see Pastor Cal coming on the screen and sharing that they are setting up an activity to help Chris and Alyssa reconnect. Translation: the show probably threatened Alyssa with stiff fines and legal action if she tried to back out of the process and stop filming. So during this particular scene, Chris and Alyssa are playing a friendly game of tennis, and even Stevie Wonder could see that Alyssa is just putting on for the cameras. When Chris and Alyssa take a break from tennis, they talk about moving into the apartment together. Alyssa shares that she doesn't feel comfortable moving into the apartment with Chris. Chris informs Alyssa that he's moving into the apartment and she can move in if she wants to or not. And while Chris is talking, Alyssa cuts him off. And this was pretty much for Alyssa to play the victim again. And before we go any further, I know that last week there was a huge debate on whether or not Jasmina cut Michael off, but I think we all can agree that for this episode, Alyssa deliberately cut Chris off and left the conversation before he could continue expressing his thoughts. What I've noticed from Alyssa is that this is part of her playbook for dealing with Chris. First, she puts forth minimal effort to engage with Chris, then she tries to get some space away from him. She engages in conversation, only to paint herself as the victim before walking away when it gets too hot. And if you ask me, I think Alyssa hasn't completely left the process for a number of reasons. For one, she may be dependent upon the paychecks that she gets from the show. 2, a free apartment for 2 months is a pretty sweet deal. And 3, she wants to control the narrative on the show. And if she's allowed to film scenes with her friends, then she can be shown in a positive light. But at this point in time, we all know that Alyssa wants no part of the marriage and she won't initiate the separation process. Lastly, let's talk about Jasmina and Michael. Their first scene together was a double date with Katina and Elijah. And during this meeting, Michael reveals that he and Jasmina are both opinionated, which can be both good and bad. Jasmina retorts that while they're both opinionated, she can see both sides of an issue, while Michael can't. Michael then hits Jasmina with that Uno reverse card, and lets Katina and Elijah know that he could say the same about Jasmina. So let me address this real quick. I fully agree that Michael and Jasmina are very similar in that they are opinionated, but I think where they differ is that Michael is self-aware that his opinions can be negative, and too much negativity can sabotage a good thing. Unfortunately, he tends to not know when to pick and choose the best battles to fight. Whereas with Jasmina, it seems like she isn't self-aware of how her opinions can be negative from time to time, or how her need to be right can come at a cost. Michael and Jasmina are essentially oil and water. They can either both change, they can both end their connection, or one of them can change and ultimately ends up unhappy because they don't feel like they can be themselves around the other person. But later on in the episode, we see Michael and Jasmina go out on an adventure, and the tension between the two of them is pretty thick. The tension eventually goes away, and the two of them have some fun in the water. So towards the 1 hour and 20-minute mark of the episode, the cast members meet up for a group dinner. This is their last night of the honeymoon, and while everyone at the table gets a chance to share their experience in the process, it quickly becomes the Chris and Alyssa show. The topic of moving into the apartments is brought up by Nora, and Alyssa blindsides Chris by suggesting that they alternate time in the apartment, with Chris staying in the apartment for 1 month and Alyssa staying in the apartment for a second month. The look on everyone's face when Alyssa shares the plan is priceless because it makes no damn sense, and it causes Chris to reach his breaking point. Chris lets everyone at the table know that he likes them, but he's on the show to find his wife and not solely to make new friends. Chris pours his heart out during this time and lets everyone know that he signed up willing to give the process a shot, and he wants Alyssa to make it known whether she is in or out. And when Chris told everybody that he's not looking to split time in the apartment like some divorced parents, I stood up from my seat and looked at the screen with pride. Chris didn't handle the situation like I would have handled it, but he stood his ground, which was a good start. We then see Alyssa going on and on about how it's not fair for her to give an answer on whether she's in the process or not in front of everybody, as well as how she feels that Chris is trying to assassinate her character and how she came into the process with the best intentions. But Chris isn't having any of it. The scene ultimately ends with Chris and Alyssa being encouraged to meet privately to talk about their future on the show. And when they finally have this private conversation, Alyssa leaves before Chris can hold her accountable. The couples then say their goodbyes to Puerto Rico, and that's how the episode ends. Now on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll give this episode a 5. It was more the same, but I liked how Chris was finally able to speak up for himself. He's a good guy who deserves better, and I hope he finds the woman for him in the future. But this has been my review. Feel free to leave the comments below in the comment section, and I'll reply to each and every comment. Until next time, stay tuned and stay safe. Peace.